He looked me up and down like I was furniture. Then he smirked and said, "I don't shake hands with assistants. Get me a drink instead." The room went silent. A few people laughed, that nervous, uncomfortable kind of laugh people do when they don't know what else to do. I looked at my boss. He looked at the floor. I turned back to the CEO. I smiled slowly, and I thought, he has no idea what he just started. By the next morning, everything he'd spent 22 years building was gone, and I was the reason why. My name is Jade. I'm 34 years old, and I want to tell you exactly how it happened. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an executive, I don't have a corner office or a company car. I'm a senior compliance analyst at a mid-size financial firm in Chicago. That means I spend my days reading reports, cross-checking numbers, and looking for things that don't add up. It's not glamorous work. Most people at networking events don't even know what compliance means. They smile, nod, and then turn to talk to someone more impressive. I grew up in a working-class family in Dayton, Ohio. My mom cleaned offices at night. My dad drove a delivery truck. Nobody in my family had a college degree before me, and I paid for every single semester myself. Scholarships, night shifts at a call center, whatever it took. I graduated without asking anyone for a dime. For years, I've been the invisible one, the quiet woman in the back of the room full of loud, well-connected men who all seemed to already know each other. I've been talked over in meetings, left off email chains, handed the boring parts of projects while someone else took the credit. But here's what they never understood. Being invisible has a benefit. You see everything. You hear everything. And when you're as detail-obsessed as I am, you don't miss much. I wasn't the most powerful person in any room, but I was always the most prepared. If someone has ever looked through you like you weren't worth their time, subscribe right now, because this story is for you. Tell me in the comments, what's the most dismissive thing someone in power ever said to you? I read every single one. Click hype and let's get into it. 3 days after that gala, I was assigned to assist with a routine compliance audit of Hargrove Capital. That was the CEO's firm, the man who had told me to get him a drink. His name was Derek Hargrove, 53 years old, self-made, or so the press releases said. His firm managed over $2 billion in client assets. Before I even opened the first file, my supervisor pulled me aside. His voice was low, almost apologetic. "Don't dig too deep, Jade. Hargrove is a client we can't afford to lose." I nodded. I said I understood. I sat down at my desk and opened the quarterly report. It started with one number, a figure in the third column of a cash flow statement that was off by a small amount, the kind of thing most people would call a rounding error and move on. I didn't move on. I never move on from things like that. I pulled the supporting documents, then the supplementary filings, then the transaction logs for the related accounts. What looked like a minor discrepancy at first began to grow into something else entirely. The same pattern repeated across 4 separate entities, shell companies, all registered within a 6-month window, all funneling money in ways that didn't match the reported figures. It wasn't sloppy bookkeeping, it was deliberate. I printed my findings, walked to my manager's office, and laid them on his desk. He barely glanced at them. "That's above your pay grade," he said. "Flag it internally and move on." I went back to my desk, but something was bothering me, so I did one more thing I probably wasn't supposed to do. I searched my manager's name in the email archive I still had access to. There they were. Months of emails between my manager and Hargrove's CFO. Casual, friendly, coordinated. The timestamps went back long before our firm was ever assigned to this audit. Then I found the memo, an internal document, not meant for my eyes. My name was in it. The instruction next to it read, "Manage the analyst before she becomes a problem." My hands were steady. My face was calm. Inside, something shifted. They weren't just trying to protect a client. They were protecting themselves, and they had already decided I was in the way. The next week, I was removed from the audit team. My manager called it a restructuring decision. No explanation, no conversation, just a brief email and a revoked access badge for the relevant file system. The colleague they put in my place had been with the firm for 14 months. He had no compliance certification, no audit experience. He was pleasant and agreeable, and he would never ask the questions I had been asking. I said nothing. I kept coming to work. I kept doing my job on the other accounts I'd been given. I watched and I waited. Then came the department meeting. Hargrove joined on a video call, which was unusual. My manager spent 10 minutes walking through the audit progress, and at one point he mentioned, almost casually, that some early findings had been overreaching and amateurish. He didn't use my name. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew who he meant. Hargrove was watching from the screen at the end of the table. He leaned back in his chair, smiled, and said, "I heard you had a little analyst with big ideas. That's cute." Some people laughed again, that same nervous, uncomfortable laugh people do. I sat with my hands flat on the table. My jaw was tight. I didn't blink. I didn't respond. I had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing you can do to a man like that is stay completely calm when he expects you to crack. But it wasn't over. A week later, HR called me in. There was a performance concern in my file, they said. Vague language, no specific incident, no prior warning. I had never had a single negative review in 4 years at that firm. That afternoon, a colleague I trusted stopped by my desk. She leaned close and kept her voice low. "They're building a paper trail to push you out, Jade. Watch your back." I thanked her. I waited until I got home. Then I sat down at my personal laptop and I got to work. Here is what they didn't know about me. 3 years earlier, I watched a senior analyst at my firm get scapegoated for a compliance failure that was never his fault. They had quietly shifted documentation after the fact and made him look careless. He was gone within a month. I never forgot that. So I had built a habit, a quiet, private, consistent habit. Every time I worked on a sensitive file, before any access could ever be revoked, I wrote detailed personal notes summarizing every anomaly I encountered. Dates, figures, account references, everything. I stored them in an encrypted folder on a personal drive that had nothing to do with my work system. I had been doing this with the Hargrove audit from the very first day. What they didn't know was that I had already documented everything. Every figure, every name, every date. I had a time-stamped cross-referenced record of the financial irregularities that was detailed enough to outline a clear pattern of securities fraud. And I had something else. One email, sent to me by mistake 3 weeks earlier, that placed my manager and Hargrove's CFO in direct communication about the structure of the shell entities, sent 5 weeks before our firm was officially engaged for the audit. They thought removing me from the audit meant removing the evidence. They were wrong. I was the evidence. I opened a new message window. I typed one name, Dr. Patricia Osai. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 years, not since I'd left the graduate program where she'd been my professor. She had spent 20 years as an enforcement attorney at the SEC before retiring to consult for a financial watchdog nonprofit. She was sharp, patient, and she did not tolerate dishonesty from anyone, regardless of how much money they had. I typed, "I need to meet. I have something you'll want to see." She replied in 40 minutes. She said, "Tomorrow, noon, bring everything." Dr. Osai read through my documentation at a corner table in a quiet coffee shop near her office. The smell of dark roast and warm wood filled the room. She didn't speak for a long time. She turned each page slowly, making small marks in the margins with a pencil she kept tucked behind her ear. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at me directly. "Jade, this isn't a compliance issue. This is a federal one." She told me she had a contact, an active investigator at the SEC's regional office, someone she had worked with before and trusted. She said she could make a quiet introduction, nothing official yet, just a conversation. I said yes. Meanwhile, the world outside my small, careful operation kept spinning. Hargrove was everywhere. There were photos of him at a charity gala in the Tribune, laughing with 2 city council members. His PR team put out a press release announcing a new $400 million fund launch. They called it their most ambitious offering to date. His PR team was working overtime. Then my manager sent me an email. The language was cordial, professional, and completely transparent in what it was really saying. He wrote that given the current team restructuring, it might be a good moment for me to reflect on whether my long-term goals aligned with the firm's direction. He said he'd be happy to provide a reference if I chose to explore other opportunities. I read it twice. I started typing a reply. Then I deleted it. I closed the laptop. Not yet, I thought. Not until it's done. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room at the SEC's regional office in downtown Chicago. The chairs were stiff, and the air smelled faintly of paper and air conditioning. Dr. Osai sat to my left. A federal investigator named Carol Whitfield sat directly across from us. She was methodical, unhurried, and had already reviewed my full documentation twice before this meeting. We heard them before we saw them, the sound of confident footsteps and rolling luggage in the hallway. Hargrove walked in with 2 attorneys and his CFO. They were expecting a standard inquiry, a formality probably, the kind of meeting their legal team had handled dozens of times. Then Hargrove saw me. He stopped walking. His expression changed. It moved through confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like the beginning of fear. "You?" he said. "You're the source?" I looked at him. I flag what doesn't add up. That's my job. Investigator Whitfield opened the meeting and walked through the findings without any drama. 4 shell entities, 18 months of misreported figures, the coordinating email thread, the timeline that placed the concealment structure before our firm's engagement even began. She laid it out the way a good investigator does, fact by fact, date by date. One of Hargrove's attorneys leaned forward and said, "She's a disgruntled employee with a grudge. This is a personal vendetta." Dr. Osai did not raise her voice. She did not shift in her seat. She simply looked at the attorney and said, "She's a compliance analyst with a federal filing, 3 corroborating sources, and documentation your own CFO signed off on. You're welcome to challenge it." The room went quiet. Hargrove stared at the table in front of him. His CFO had gone pale. His lead attorney shuffled papers without looking up. The next morning, the SEC issued a formal freeze on the new fund launch. Trading in 4 affiliated accounts was suspended pending investigation. By 10 o'clock, 2 financial news outlets had the story. By noon, it was everywhere. My manager was placed on administrative leave before the end of the business day. Derek Hargrove released a brief statement saying he was stepping down from his role as CEO to cooperate fully with regulators. His PR team used the word voluntarily. Nobody believed it. The $2 billion empire didn't disappear overnight. These things never do. But the freeze was the beginning of the end. Everyone in the industry knew it. The phone stopped ringing for Hargrove Capital. The meetings were canceled. The investors started asking questions that had no good answers. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a financial oversight consultancy that Dr. Osai had recommended me to. Senior analyst role, more autonomy, better pay, work that actually mattered. I accepted. On my last day at the firm, I packed my desk in about 20 minutes. 1 box, a few framed certificates, a plant, a coffee mug my mom had given me when I got the job. That was it. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. My former manager called my cell while I was in the elevator. I looked at the screen. I let it go to voicemail. I have never listened to that message. I walked out of that building and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The city was loud and cold and completely indifferent to everything that just happened. I took a breath. Derek Hargrove refused to shake my hand because he thought I was invisible. He thought invisible meant harmless. He thought it meant I didn't matter. But invisible people see everything. They hear everything. They document everything. And sometimes that is exactly enough. I sat down at my new desk on a Monday morning, opened a fresh file, put my coffee to the left, and got back to work. If you've ever been told to stay in your lane when you knew something was wrong, this story was for you. If someone in power has ever tried to silence you at work or made you feel like your instincts didn't matter, I want to hear about it. Leave your story in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe to this channel. This is a space for people who don't back down quietly. And click hype to help this story reach every person who's ever been underestimated in a room full of people who should have known better. Standing up against powerful people is not easy. It costs something. If you've ever been in that position, you already know. Subscribe and become part of this community. People here show up for each other. If this story meant something to you, let me know by clicking hype and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.